Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 14 of Supergirl called Truth, Justice, and the American Way. Now, if this video seems a little bit off, this is actually going to be the second time I recorded this review. I was recording it, actually recorded it last night, and then at the last second there was a technical problem, which caused me to lose the review, and I just didn't have the energy to just start over from scratch. So here we go. Let's hope I can do a decent or at least just as good job this time around. So anyway, let's just kind of get right into things. And the first thing that stands out about this episode to me is the title. Now, just so we understand the whole truth, justice, and the American way, well, DC more or less kind of dropped the American way from anything involving Superman, like back in the 1980s. Um, and now this is just occasionally referenced in a kind of an ironic or humorous way from time to time in the Superman comics, simply because that was a part of the character. You know, something that was known by everybody in regards to the character for several decades. But again, they don't really, you know, trumpet that as the way it was. I mean, it was a different time, and well, if you're familiar with anything about the 1980s, yeah, trying to act as if the American way was always the correct way was a little bit difficult in Ronald Reagan's America, despite what some politicians will tell you today. So anyway, so the idea that Superman would kind of be that political and that frankly nationalistic just really doesn't fit with the more modern interpretations of the character. And while I understand the nostalgia for the simpler times, I am more or less glad that that isn't something they do with the character anymore. Now, kind of moving on into what's actually going on in this episode. Let's kind of start small and sort of work our way up. Um, this is actually, I think, the best episode so far for Non as a character. Now, previously I've complained that Non seems very, very cookie cutter, very underdeveloped as a villain. Here, him coming in and saying like, "Look, it's time to bury Astra. You know, there's this ritual we have that a female will say this prayer. Are you willing to do this?" And Kara, accepts quite readily. And she even, says like, "Look, if Non wanted to come here for a fight, we'd know it. But that's not him." Remember, she would have known Non on Krypton too, at least to some degree. Probably not as well as her aunt, but this was technically her uncle, at least by marriage. And she is completely right. Non is absolutely sincere that he wants this ritual properly observed so that Astra can rest in peace according to Kryptonian beliefs. And Kara even mentions Rao, the sun god, basically the main deity of the Kryptonians. In fact, as I recall, it's, well, the only deity that I'm aware of. Well, divine deity. There was a story where a Superman actually ended up fighting some demons from the Kryptonian version of Hell, which was kind of interesting. But in any case, it's a very touching scene, and Melissa Benoist once again really, really knocks it out of the park here. The prayer, it does sort of read like something people would say when saying goodbye to someone who's died. And again, Non is completely sincere when he says, "Look, I'm going to observe the mourning period from this, but when these 2 weeks are up, I'm going to come and I'm going to come and f and kill you." And well, from Non's point of view, it was Astra's compassion for Kara that really led to her downfall. She hesitated. She got captured. She was reluctant to do things that, if it was anyone else, she'd have done in a heartbeat. It caused her to doubt and to step away from the course of action that both of them had committed to in order to do what they believed was necessary in order to save what remains of the Kryptonian race. So in a way, it's not just Astra's death that Non is blaming Kara for. He's blaming her for putting the entire future of what is left of the Kryptonian species, Superman aside, and her of Kara, of course, in peril. Supergirl, in his mind, is actually, in a way, fighting for the extinction of her own race in Nan's mind. I mean, it's messed up logic, but in a way, it makes sense. Wow, my hair looks absolutely awful today. Oh well, c'est la vie. Anyway, moving on to some other things. Speaking of stuff related to the Superman mythology, we're introduced to the character of Siobhan, who, if you know your Superman comics, you know that she's someone who's got a role to play in the Superman mythology. Beyond that, I'm not really going to say anything because I don't want to spoil stuff for anybody. Although anyone who knows their comics or has been paying attention to the promotional material for Supergirl knows what's coming up with her. And once again, here she's presented as very sort of cookie cutter corporate climber, manipulative sort of person. And all right, this is just her first episode, her first introduction. They needed to get some kind of a characterization for her up and running, and from there we'll see where they take it. Let's see. So that's about all I had to say about her. Lucy. Lucy just continues in my mind to sort of really be one of the show's weak points. They've made a few efforts, but for me, she really feels like one of the people that really desperately needs to be fleshed out in order for me to really care about what's happening with her. And they're trying here with this episode, but it's just like, I'm sorry, Lucy, I don't really know you well enough as a character to really care about whether or not your relationship with Jimmy works. Now, I did like that she's, genuinely like, look, what's going on with you in Supergirl? And remember, if I'm correct, one of the things that led them to break up in the first place was Jimmy just being too committed to his friendship with Superman. And now here it looks like history is repeating itself, only this time it's an attractive blonde instead of another guy. So, yeah, Lucy is not unjustified in her concerns here, especially given the obvious and that we know of unresolved tension between Kara and Jimmy. Um, so let's see. Speaking of Jimmy, let's kind of finish things out with him. Watching that scene with him and Cat Grant, where she sort of gives him that lecture about, we have to we have to do this is what we have to do in order to be good people was kind of hilarious, given that Kat has a history of degrading her employees, bullying them, threatening them, doing things that are borderline illegal and flat out illegal in regards to her treatment of her employees, and just is currently, oh yeah, involved in a personal vendetta to make her Kara's life hell for, according to her, missing out on work when she should be working. Okay, Kat's justified in being upset about that, but most of it is Kara dumped my son and I'm pissed, so I'm making her life hell at work, which again is hideously unethical and doubtlessly illegal. I mean, there is such a thing called creating a hostile work environment. So we can add this to the number of times in which Kat's employees would be totally justified in bringing charges against her in court for her behavior towards them. But this is television where, bosses can get away with this sort of thing, and we're supposed to think it's funny. Yeah. Yeah. And, yeah. If I seem a little twitchy about this, well, let's just say that I've worked for one or two people where it's just like, ah, man, if I wasn't such a low man on the totem pole, I would do something about this. But yeah, yeah. Okay, well let's put bad memories aside. Well, also lawyers cost money, which I didn't have at the time. But yeah, whatever. Ahem. So let's see. Nothing particular to say about the whole Alex and John situation. It's just like, no, no, no. I can deal with Kara hating me. If she found out that you were really the one who killed it, like, okay, all right. It's just kind of reminding us and continuing this plot point so that we don't forget about it. And Kara does continue to be extremely passive aggressive towards John, and John's just like, all right, I knew what I was getting myself in for. I'm just gonna be totally zen about this. And of course, this is completely eating up Alex. She's seeing John, who's doing what, under the circumstances, is a reasonably noble thing, and that's just compounding her own guilt about the whole situation. So, of course, this is eventually going to blow up in a wonderfully spectacular fashion because that's how things go on TV. Everything has to happen in the worst way possible because that's what makes drama. I repeatedly mentioned in my reviews that one of the best ideas for what makes good drama in television is a quote from Joss Whedon that he gave in an interview talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer years ago. And he basically boiled it down to this: Buffy should be unhappy. And this of course mean that the characters on TV shows should never be happy, that good things should never happen to them, and it all should be some just giant downer mope fest. No, of course not. Nobody would want to watch that. But there always needs to be a problem. There always needs to be a conflict. And even among characters who like each other and care about each other, um, there needs to be conflict. There needs to be this the alliances always needs to be shifting. In fact, speaking of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I was really lucky one time when I was in college, where one of the writers, Marty Noxon, came to speak at my university, and I got to ask her. I asked her, like, well, how do you keep things going between the characters? How do you keep them growing? And that thing about she said about shifting alliances constantly was part of her answer. She said like when Buffy came back from the dead, like they said talking about how they were going like, okay, how are we going to deal with this? Like, well, there's the option that Buffy continues to push her friends away. Buffy reconnects with all of her friends. Buffy reconnects with one of her friends. And again, you just that's what writers do. So yeah, let's see what else. What else? What else? Um, So our big plot this episode involves a character called the Master Jailer. Now this is a character I've heard reference to, but I really know nothing about. So there was a nice nod to the comics, though. Actually, two. So before we get into talking about the main plot, I guess I should mention those. The astronomy professor mentions that he's from a planet called Starhaven. Yeah, that's right, Starhaven. And in the comics, this was the home world to one of the members of the Legion of Superheroes, which is kind of cool. Um, most of the Legion of Superheroes, despite being from various planets, look like humans, and there's actually an in-universe explanation for that, but I don't remember exactly what it is. So, kind of referencing that and sort of tapping into characters from those planets, I think would be a really cool way to, you know, tap into the DC mythology and be able to bring in powered people for to be antagonists or allies. And of course, the Legion, they're also big fans of time travel, so you never know. Although I have a feeling that given Jeff Johns' involvement with the Flash TV show, if we see live action Legion on any DC TV show, it would probably be the Flash. I mean, we saw the Legion flight ring the other week, so yeah. Um, and then there's also this bit where Hank and Alex are talking about, well, maybe this guy's a bounty hunter, and Alex is like, "Oh, you don't think it's him, do you?" And Hank is all like, "No, no. If it was him, we would know." And this is almost certainly a reference to the character of Lobo, who in the comics is a well-known space bounty hunter type character. Basically, sort of like this really rude and crude space biker who's also one of like the toughest dudes in the entire universe. Lobo is a character who's never really been my cup of tea. So, but if they were ever to actually bring in a live action Lobo, I would genuinely be kind of interested to see what what they did with it, because one thing I do admit that I do like about Lobo is if you throw him up against Superman, I mean it's a very interesting contrast of personalities. Superman's this big blue Boy Scout, and Lobo is basically this rooting crude space biker. Except they both have about equal levels of power, and Superman really does not like Lobo at all, but sort of sees it as his duty to sort of, when he's around, try to keep Lobo from doing more damage than is absolutely necessary. So it's just this constant exercise in frustration for Superman, and I have to admit that that does work well. But anyway, the main plot here, and this really kind of feeds into the whole question of, well, just how far do you take things in the name of security? And this is all hinges on Jimmy's big speech about how, hey, you're denying Maxwell Lord his basic human rights. Yeah, we know he's guilty of all kinds of crap, but if you throw him in that box and deny him his basic rights, how are you any better than him? And this feeds into what the master jailer is doing. He's going around and executing these people, these criminals. Now, we're given evidence that it looks like most of them deserve that. But when we come to the astronomy professor, he was somebody who was a criminal just out of sheer desperation. And once he got out of that, he just like, look, I just want to live a peaceful life. And that didn't matter. The master jailer made no distinctions. He looked at only the facts, not the people involved. And Jimmy did have that really nice bit where he said, like, look, it's not when it comes to defeating your enemies, it's the most important thing isn't your strength or your speed or your smarts. It's that you really legitimately do have the moral high ground here. And this feeds into what I've said repeatedly in my reviews here and other places about what Superman's greatest power is. And it's not the X-ray vision or the invulnerability or anything like that. It's that Superman's greatest power is wisdom. He has absolutely godlike power. I mean, even says Maxwell Lord is terrified of you because he knows that you could walk into that room and swat him like a bug, and there wouldn't be a damn thing he could do about it. But Superman has the wisdom, gained primarily from two simple Kansas farmers, to use his powers and not abuse them, to use them for the betterment of all people. Now, Superman is not perfect. He makes mistakes, just like everybody else. But most of the time, he does the right thing. In fact, this episode's title reminds me of one of the best modern Superman stories written by Joe Kelly called What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way? And this was actually made into an animated movie called Superman versus the Elite, which you can find my review of here on YouTube. And it's a very good story about why Superman's ethics, particularly his stance against not killing, is indeed perfectly valid and still the morally correct stance for somebody who wants to see themselves as a true superhero. And it's delivered in an absolutely amazing way, and it's very much a story I would recommend everybody read. But it really goes to the heart of what Jimmy was saying, is that it's the values, it's what you stand for, it's what you fight for, it's what that symbol right there stands for that really lets you defeat your enemies. And it takes Kara a while to come around, but eventually she does. And I do like how they mention at the end, it's just like, look, we're cutting you loose, so just get out of here. And Kara says to Max, like, you know what? I hope there is a part of you that is still a good person, that sees that I don't have to be that it doesn't have to be this way, that you don't have to do these things. Then Max steps in, but by the way, just in case, we've got a whole bunch of evidence that can get you thrown in jail for a long, long time if you decide to rat us out. Now, I kind of have to say, I think Alex has a little bit of a superior uh, bargaining position here because the public already knows that aliens exist. Um, the idea of there being this secret government agency whose job it is to fight them, I don't think the people are really going to be pissed about that. I think they'd be happy. Now, them locking up Maxwell Lord without his civil rights being in play, um, the U.S. government currently has quite a few people locked up with, well, their rights situation currently being a matter of very serious contention. And it's been that way for a while. So, yeah, I think that's a storm the government could weather, while Maxwell Lord, well, media, the public love to see someone they admired fall. So, on that cheerful note, I think we're going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And also, please join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.